Good day, everyone. Welcome to Critical Faculty Podcast. Today is a special day. Today in Australia, we're the 12th already, Sunday the 12th, it's Darwin Day. And I've got just the right celebration for you, celebrating the idea that's changed the world forever, in my opinion. And the panel to explain all the difficult questions you might have or all the suspicions you might have about the theory of evolution via natural selection. Please join me in welcoming Erika. Hello, Erika. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. Hello, Aron.
How you do?
Very good, thank you. G'day, Dave.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, I'm so excited. I really cannot hide my excitement. This is a very special day, and it's a great celebration for, and I think probably we ought to spend a few minutes commemorating the man who's made this podcast maybe possible, Charles Darwin. And I'd like you all to chip in and say, what do you think of this man and his simple idea that has changed the world forever, starting with Erika?
Oh man, I mean, where do you start, right? Like it's the theory of evolution and indeed all that ties into it and has tied into it as we've continued to discover more in the past century and a half it's the foundation of all that we understand of biology, like from the ground up. Absolutely nothing works without it. And in that way, he's sort of the father of the entire field, isn't he? I mean, naturalism as sort of a field of work by people who are being naturalists, right, has been done by humans since the dawn of time, since we were capable of observing the world around us. But Darwin contextualized it in such an elegant way that, you know, when Origin came out, right, people were like, duh, right? That was the general reaction of the scientific community, right? It was, wait, okay, of course, right? Which is, I think about as important as it sounds, which is to say very.
Fantastic. Aron, what do you reckon of the great man?
Well, here's the thing. Carolus Linnaeus in 1735, this is the most important argument that I can think of. Carolus Linnaeus, when he constructed his systematic classification of life, he realized that the animal species that he was looking at were not simply species. They weren't just like created kinds, because each one was nested in a parent category, which was itself nested in a further parent category, and that all of these were interconnected like a family tree of life. And he couldn't make sense of that. That would require, his system required that speciation must happen, which he, in the 1700s, thought that a species could only come about through a special act of creation by God. Certainly you can have variation within a species, but to produce a new species, he thought initially, had to be a divine action. And it was a century later that Charles Darwin says, well, no, he explained the origin of species by means of natural selection. So Charles Darwin showed that there is a mechanism by which new species can come about. And since we've discovered multiple mechanisms by which species could come about. I wasn't talking to you, Siri. Shut the fuck up and stay out of my conversation. Anyway, so when Darwin came up with the origin of species, that sort of solved Linnaeus' dilemma. And creationists at the time were always arguing about it. We've never seen a new species evolve. And even when I was a child, where people were still saying we've never seen a new species evolve, except that now even the leaders of evangelical ministries like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham admit that speciation is directly observed and documented so often and so definitely that they can't even argue against it anymore. So what they've done is they've moved the goalposts. Mm-hmm. To say that macroevolution is no longer the variation of new or the emergence of new species, that it must be some undefined higher level. But we know that the word was never defined as anything other than changes at or above the species level, which means that speciation is part of macroevolution. And so everybody that wants to argue that it's the genus level or the family level, or in Ken Ham's case, where they want to say that it can even be the level of a taxonomic order if necessary, just to avoid having to admit when something, is evolved that you're not comfortable with admitting evolving. They have to change that. They know what they're doing is deliberately deceptive, but it's all about make believe. They have to believe in a fairy tale. if they have to believe it, and they'll make up any excuse that they can to do that.
You've never seen a whale turn into a pine tree. That's pretty much what that is. Probably we should maybe take a moment of silence for Kent Hovind's YouTube career. I'm sure everyone's gotten that news, right?
Catch me up,
He's
Dave.
gone.
What happened?
He's gone. They deleted his YouTube channels. He's no longer there.
Well, pseudoscience.
What he did immediately after that was, so once he discovered that, was he made an announcement on another channel that he was going to move everything to his DAL dinosaur.
And then they deleted that one.
Adventureland, whatever, the fucking amusement park fraudulent scheme, whatever they called it.
Tool.
And then that was immediately canceled as well.
Was it on the back of spreading misinformation?
Yeah.
Misinformation.
Well, no, it's not more
Being
complicated.
kind.
It was the apricot seeds, wasn't it? Right?
Harboring the pedophile or something like that. I don't know the details, but it's obviously a lot more nefarious than. It's not just misinformation. Otherwise, a lot more people would have their YouTube channels.
That's
revoked.
true. Yeah, because
So
the
it's
game
more
had
serious
that
than that.
article. They had the hit piece that came out, and then that led to taking action.
There's some criminal activity. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but obviously, you know, he's dealing with all kinds of criminal stuff.
I love the way that you describe Kent Hovind as saying there's some criminal activity.
Yeah, they got him on something. I don't know what it was. I emailed my partner manager. I was like, Dean, I don't know who was in charge of the decision to get rid of Kent Hovind's channels, but tell that guy I owe him a beer.
And I'm a fruit basket.
Yeah.
I want to start from the very beginning. Do you guys, like me, think physics, chemistry, biochemistry, biology is the sequence of events? And do you think there are some connections among all these factors? So we start with physics and the creation of the emergence of the universe, and then for everything to be glued together, you need chemistry, and then emerges biochemistry, and then biology. Would that be the right sequence?
If I may, I'd like to jump into this one first. I mean, Dave probably has a better answer than I do, but this is the most irritating thing for me when I talk to creationists and they realize, okay, well, you definitely know evolution, so let's talk about anything else. Let's talk about the origin of the universe. And all I can say to that is, I don't know cosmology, but I've spoken to a number of cosmogonists, like Sean Carroll and Lawrence Krauss. By the way, Lawrence Krauss does not believe that the universe came from nothing. I know that he wrote a book with that title, but it was just the title.
Mm-hmm.
You have to read past that to realize that that's not actually what he was saying. And so cosmologists commonly say that even in models of cosmogony where there is a singularity, which is not constant. I mean, there are other models in which there's not one. But in the models that have a singularity, that singularity is still considered to be eternal. It didn't come from nowhere. So the near constant assault that I hear from creation, well, you believe everything came from nothing. No, that's you guys. You believe that in creation ex nihilo. We don't. We believe in the first law of thermodynamics, that material energy is eternal, was never created. You're the ones that think that God said abracadabra and poof out of nothing, not us.
Yeah. The reason, I just want to give this a background. The reason I'm bringing this up is I'm trying to say that life isn't, if life is fundamental, then why it is not at the beginning.
Clearly, life is not fundamental.
Yeah, it doesn't look that way because we have to wait for quite some time. I think up to 3.8 billion years from this point, about 700 million years after Earth has emerged. And obviously the temperature did not allow for life. And maybe Dave can add some interesting chemistry here, because I think chemistry was at play before all of that happened.
Well, yeah, obviously, I mean, the chronologically what you said has to be true, right? The things that life are made of, namely molecules, are made possible due to laws of chemistry, which require the existence of atoms, which are described by physics. So yeah, that must be true. Yeah, I don't know. We went in a few different directions all really quickly. Which way do we want to go here?
So if life isn't fundamental and it's an emerging property, it's something that emerges.
Yeah.
And then it's, I think Edwin Schrödinger, who's a physicist, wrote a book called What is Life? And I love his interpretation of what life is. It's a challenge against entropy. It's a cell that closes on itself to sustain itself. to keep the information for as long as it can. And that's the start of life. And reproduction here is going to be a key word, because the reproduction at that time happens to be identical. It's splitting, and then we end up evolving that mechanism to sexual reproduction that is going to cause all these sort of conversations we're about to have: natural selection, adaptability, and all the mechanics of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think then? Yeah, go ahead.
A key point, though, just to jump in, though, is some of the papers that I've read, which I can't really recall the details off the top of my head, but more and more what I saw in reading those papers is that this myth of going against entropy is actually not true. It's actually entropy that prompted the generation of these structures as a way of dissipating these flows of free energy, namely sunlight. So in some of the content I made on James Tour, I highlighted some papers, namely from Eigen and then a few other people. This was actually earlier stuff in the 70s and 80s. They're describing life as a manifestation of the second law of thermodynamics. So specifically being prompted by entropy. So it's not in opposition to entropy. So it's just another layer. Anytime you hear, somebody, entropy, you can't make order, so life violates, I don't even know what the hell they say these days, but it's idiotic, right? Life is specifically prompted by entropy. So,
Very interesting. Erika, you got anything to say to that?
I mean, how would that be any different than just the fact that in reactions, things tend to go from an unstable state to a more stable state? Like they want to become more stable. We see this all the time in systems across chemistry and physics. I don't see why life would necessarily be an exception to that. But of course, no one has a problem with that. That's common sense. It's only problematic when it's life, and when the process in life is being tied to something that may not require their preconceived notions about how things came to be. Then it's a problem to them.
Something is either going to achieve some degree of at least temporal balance, or it's going to collapse. And so that's where we're at, and that's what life is, and that's what the orbits of the planets are. It's an illusion, perhaps in some cases, but it's at least a temporal balance where we're only slightly bombarded with other bodies in the boiling chaos that is the clockwork precision of God.
Yeah. Our sun has an end. I think it's got another 5 billion years before the energy is out. Our universe itself is going towards the same destiny. It looks like everything is destined to nothing. And when I say nothing here, I'm saying the physical nothing, not the philosophical one. And it might just keep turning around. Now, let's start with the first.
I just want to throw in something on what you said, because there's people listening to that who think, well, what will we do then? We'll have been long extinct before that.
Don't worry about it.
Hey, you don't know that. We might make it.
Yeah. Well, I remember something really funny. Christopher Hitchens was talking about the same thing, and he said the sun is got 5 billion years to go, and somebody said, "Excuse me, did you say 5 billion years or 5 million years?" He said 5 billion. He said, "Thank God." As if this is going to make any difference.
Big difference, yeah. Well, it could. I mean, it's 1,000 times more likely that we'll be around in 5 million years as opposed to 5 billion. So
the first serious question that came on the Myth Vision group with our friend Derek is that speciation. One person has challenged the today's broadcast, and Aron has responded to him. And it was mainly about speciation. And he actually quoted verbatim a C. Meyer Discovery Institute portion where it says, well, we do accept microevolution. We can see things are trying to adapt, but we don't accept macroevolution. We think no species sort of emerge, or they don't, new species don't emerge on the back of evolution. Evolution is just the adaptability of species to suit their environment. And we'll start with Erika on that. Oh, sorry, with Aron, because he is the person who challenged that one first.
To my experience, when creationists say that they always do, that they say that they accept microevolution, but they reject macroevolution, they don't know what either of these words mean to begin with. And secondly, the fact of the matter is that they usually reject micro and accept macro. because by definition, macroevolution is the large-scale evolution, which means literally, and many academic sources will spell this out, that it's the beginning, with the emergence of new species is the beginning of macroevolution. So they'll admit that, as I said before, that Ken Ham and Kent Hovind will say that speciation is observed, and that's just something we expect and we see that when that happens. And Ken Ham would say that it's at the genus level or the family level or even at the level of a taxonomic order. But what they don't accept is that mutations are the source of new genetic information. And this is high school biology. Well, at least first year college biology will tell you in the textbooks, it'll explain how mutations are the source of new genetic information. But the creationists deny that. So in fact, they reject micro and accept macro because they don't know fucking anything.
Erika?
I'm sorry if I was being too polite.
That's all right.
No, I mean, we'll assume, let's take them at their word, right? Let's just assume that they are okay with microevolution and not macroevolution, even though they are okay with macroevolution and thus certain types of speciation within these arbitrarily decided kinds. Where does it stop, right? The same exact mechanisms that dictate the descent of different species, right, dictate the descent at the genus level and at the family level and at the order level and class and so on and so forth. Go back in time. Where does it stop, right? All canids are related, all ursids are related, but neither of them are related to each other. Okay, sure. Well, where do amphicyonids fall, right? Where the dog bears fall? Are they their own kind? And if so, what about the ancestor of that individual? Where, if you could line them all up, where's the line drawn and why is it drawn there? And more importantly, what is the criteria by which we actually decide where these lines are drawn? Is it genetic? Is it morphologic? Is it common sense? They do horribly with this in the hominins. I mean, they are just, it is abysmal when you look at human evolution, to be sure, but they don't have the first, at least they give that a try. Go further back in primates and they don't have the first clue, right? And that's because very few of the people who are actually trying to draw these lines are actually formally trained at all in anything even adjacent to biology. And the ones that are have just some of the most powerful cognitive dissonance that I've ever seen in my life, right? Because sometimes they clearly show that they understand these concepts, but the second that it trudges into the territory of doing something empirical in evolutionary biology or adjacent subject, it's like their brain becomes static. It's really unsettling to see. But yeah, like where's the line drawn and why is it drawn there? Let's see some empirical work done to actually make a case for something that's standardized as well, that can be applied in the same way to hominins as it can be to ursids, as it can be to birds versus other theropods, right? Let's see something like that. I'd be curious.
Well, you know, Erika, the devil is in the details.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
I have a bit to add here if I can here.
Yes, please, Dave. Go ahead.
So I think the problem is that these people, they're not thinking like scientists. They just think like somebody who's at the zoo, right? Where did that limb come from? Where'd that wing come from? Where'd that fin come from? So first of all, the problem is they don't take even 10 seconds to Google and look at the incredible, the near seamless continuum of forms, both from not even just in the fossil record, even in extant, excuse me, in extant species that exist. All these animals that they don't even know exist today on the earth that sort of branch all of these things. But more importantly, they don't have the faintest grasp of the genetics surrounding how a body plan emerges or something like that. Like if you ask somebody, how do we go from a single-celled zygote to a fully developed animal? Watch their faces go blank. They don't have any idea how this happens, right? It's in the DNA. And then the body plan comes. Well, so if you change the DNA, it's feasible that you can change the body plan, especially those particular genes that are controlling certain aspects of the body plan. Obviously, if those change, the body plan can change. But the big issue here is that none of them, even the premium brand creationists here, your Michael Behe and these guys, they'll write these entire books. Behe wrote this entire book, Darwin Devolves. And the whole thing is that, oh, all the mutations degrade the information and they take away features and everything. It's like, dude, you're a biochemist. Like, how have you not heard about like gene duplication and neofunctionalization? You get a gene, you get 2 copies of the gene. One of them gets mutations, becomes a different gene. The other one retains the original function. Or a whole chromosome duplication. Or you can have de novo genes where a promoter goes to a new region of the chromosome, and now an entire sequence of non-coding DNA is suddenly a gene, right? So there's all these ways to get completely new genes and new proteins, and if any of them have to do with generating a new body plan, this is going to have a tremendous effect on the morphology of the organism. So even these guys who are like the kings of proselytizing this stuff, they don't understand what they're talking about. So how can you, like, when you say you reject macroevolution and you don't even have any ability to discuss any of these mechanisms, or I mean, like, what conversation are we even having here? You know what I mean?
So when we're talking micro and macro, it's to do with speciation, and one of the things that is even sometimes debated within the biological a conversation about the tools, is natural selection enough to justify speciation, or are we talking about extra layers like genetic and geographical drift, being isolated from the ancestor population, getting used and adapting to new environment where the migrant population there's new food, there's new food sources, new climate, and therefore over millions of years, that particular species will take a completely different form, and it will change shape, and it will look completely different from the population of their ancestors. And I would like Erika to comment on that.
Hold on, but before you jumped over to her, you said completely different. So they're going to say elephants gave birth to pine trees, or that hamsters.
Oh, okay, not that. Yeah, it's still an animal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have opinions on the concept of species, and these opinions are popular in some groups and unpopular in others. I would point out, that we utilize species as a means by which to categorize organisms, right? Because we are humans, we're pattern seekers, and we like to group things into categories. But there isn't a single species concept that can be universally applied to extant and extinct life that nicely separates organisms into categories with no overlap. And what I mean by that is, if we had every organism that has ever existed and we could line them all up, leading back to a last universal common ancestor, it would be impossible to mark where one species begins and another ends. It's like a color gradient, right? So we have the fortune of living, in a time period where we can sort of horizontally slice things and look at them and say, okay, well, these two things seem to be separate species. And we usually use things like the biological species concept with extant life, and the evolutionary species concept or the phylogenetic species concept with extinct life. And if you're really interested in this, you can check out Zacho's 2016. He does a really good job outlining all the species concepts and then being like, none of them are perfect, right? But something that I would like to point out, with regard to speciation, and not necessarily where we draw that line, but sort of the process, some of the processes behind it, is that one concept that I've seen, at least that creationists or those who don't understand evolution never seem to nail, is the idea that mutations, and it is of course the accumulation of mutations, the accumulation of variation, then the selection within that variation that leads eventually to speciation, they don't understand that mutations are context specific. Like, they seem to have this idea that there's like this ultimate fitness that is good in every category, and humans, things have been trying to evolve into humanity since the dawn of time. And I feel like that's a really good place to start when you're discussing speciation and the mechanisms of evolution with creationists or other people who just don't really understand it, is to discuss, the nature of traits and environments, because this is where selection is acting, right? Before we're even looking necessarily at things like gene flow and drift, we're looking just at mutation and natural selection and the context. And this is how it works, but they don't know that, right? So instead they just say, well, speciation, it's still, what is it they say? It's still a fruit fly. It's still a dog. It's still a cat, well, you're still a primate, aren't you? You're still a mammal. You're still a eukaryote.
Yeah. And birds are still dinosaurs.
Birds are still dinosaurs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to pose the same question to Aaron, but I want to add the context of because I do agree with Erica's that species is an indexing, marking, very useful way of organizing ideas, but it's more like a spectrum to me. Oh, it's always been a spectrum to me of all these animals. But it's taxonomy and the disagreement sometimes within the taxonomical arrangements of things can betray the sentiment of really we really don't have to, we or find it difficult to put a certain species in a certain category on based on what, and there's a bit of a discussion going on in taxonomy on the back of that.
The idea of species, I mean, somebody was arguing with me just the other day about this, saying that species was a bastardized term. And I said, yes, it is. Creationists have tried to bastardize it all they can. But in reality, in biology, we understand that, in different types of biology, we'll have different types of reproduction. And so the species category will have different definitions in different places. Like the way that microbes, for example, reproduce is not going to be the same thing as sexually reproductive animals or plants. And those are both different from each other. So the easiest, since we're usually talking about human evolution and humans are animals, despite all of the claims creationists make, the definition for a species within sexually reproductive animals is whether two organisms are closely related enough that they will still interbreed and produce fertile offspring after their kind, which is the Jewish word min, right? That's the only thing that the Bible was specific about. Can they produce after their kind? And if they can't, then they're different kinds. But of course, we move the goalposts as however necessary. So while they will say, then they often bring up dogs as their first argument, and they'll say that that we can, any 5-year-old can tell you that a dog is a dog kind, except that not all dogs can interbreed. Yes, Chihuahuas can technically interbreed with Great Danes, but neither of them can interbreed with the African painted dog or the Australian bush, South American bush dog or the Asian raccoon dog. These are all distinctly different species. They're still dogs. Any 5-year-old should be able to tell you that, but they're genetically distinct, too much so to interbreed anymore. And there's a gray area, yes, because there's never anything as binary as what believers want to see. So are wolves and domestic dogs different species? That depends on your definition. There is obviously a period of flux in there. Whether wolves and dogs will interbreed is often determined by whether their populations are compromised. Under normal circumstances, when they're both healthy populations, they tend not to. Tigers and lions will not interbreed, even in the few places, because there is a place in India where you can get both of them.
Like ligers, or yeah.
Yeah, so it is possible to get lions and tigers in the same place, but they don't tend to interbreed unless they're in captivity. So it's not just whether they chemically can, but whether they physically will. And when they won't interbreed at all anymore, because look at humans and chimpanzees, for example. It's possible, since we've come up with hybrids between camels and llamas, and they are much more distantly related than are humans and chimpanzees, then chemically it would likely be possible for humans and chimpanzees, though physically it is not, and culturally it's verboten. Nobody even wants to try that experiment. So we can safely say that we're different species on that criteria.
Dave, very interesting. Aaron, Dave, you anything to add to that?
Not too much. I mean, those all the distinctions of the different types of species. I mean, creationist confusion on this stems exclusively from stubbornness and an unwillingness to learn literally anything about biology. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's bring some examples here. The London Underground mosquito is one example of a speciation. But then it's not very popular because we'll say, well, it's still a mosquito. It's still, it cannot now reproduce with the ancestor population, but it's they don't want to take that as a speciation or a precursor to speciation. Do we have any other examples, Erika, Aron, and Dave, of speciation that happened in our lifetime?
They're demanding that a mosquito turn into a pine tree.
Right.
They're refusing to accept what evolution is. They don't understand, and you can look it up anywhere. Yep, like Evolution 101, the beginner's primer from UC Berkeley, and it's one of many university academic institutions that will explain that evolution is descent with inherent modification. So the simplest description is that one emergent group provides two daughter groups, both of which are still the same category as their ancestors, but they're distinct from each other. Each of the daughter groups likewise will produce two or at least two more subgroups unless one of them goes extinct. And they're increasingly distinct from their cousins, and probably increasingly distinct from their ancestors as well, but they still belong to the parent category. Humans have, where Carolus Linnaeus originally said that we had 7 taxonomic ranks, I've counted 70, so 10 times that many taxonomic ranks, to which humans still belong to every ancestral clade we ever belonged to. Everything that our ancestors were, we still are, even if we create a new clade to which they didn't belong.
I think I have a solution to this. There's something I'd want to commission from someone, from some kind of taxonomist or something, where I think the problem is people want to see, like they don't take even the 30 seconds to go look at all the transitional forms that we've uncovered. I'd like for someone to make a singular image, which would have to be admittedly enormous, that contains virtually, or if not every known extinct or extant species of life, and show all of the continuums that people are not seeing because they won't go on the internet and go look at all these things, right? So, I mean, admittedly, a lot of it would have to be somewhat hypothetical because we're not absolutely positive, right? People keep rearranging the phyla and where they go on the tree and everything. But just something, a singular image where people can look and go, okay, here's a turtle, right? And here's, I don't know, a bat. Yeah, something, or that would be more recent, right? But you can take two things that are seemingly completely unrelated and go back and look at little pictures of all the known forms, right? Because turtles, right? We know so many transitional species from modern turtles down to something more resembling a dinosaur, right? Or I'm not sure exactly where it would go, but there's a lot of those. And so just you could start in any two places and just kind of trace along and witness this slow, gradual change in morphology until you slowly get to something where you're like, all right, this is the most recent common ancestor of these two animals, right? It's like, so it's just to finish the analogy, if you picked a dozen colors and just put them like this and go, oh, those are all different colors, and then you bring the whole color wheel, it's gonna snap into place. It's gonna make sense. I want that for animals. That's it.
I was thinking, let's cut to the chase. The faithful are not really interested in animals. They want this particular diagram between Australopithecine and Homo sapiens because it's all about us, really.
Well, that'll be on there too.
No, I've made that diagram. I made that diagram myself. I took an example of oh god, I mean, there's probably 17 hominins on it, starting from Sahelanthropus chilensis, moving all the way up to anatomically modern Homo sapiens. And I've presented it several times. Where's the line drawn, right? Where's the ape kind?
Monkey, human.
That's what they always say, right? Where's the line drawn? And it gets extraordinarily dicey with hominins because there's so many different species of hominins that are also incredibly diverse. I mean, look at Homo erectus. Well, even sensu stricto, this thing is diverse, right? A wide range of brain case sizes, wide range of material cultures, right? But you include the rest of the hominids, it's not doable. It is that color gradient, as Dave suggested. You cannot draw the line.
You reckon it's going to be a matter of that Dawkins blood-boiling interview where he was telling the lady, the natural museums around the world are filled with, and actually I've witnessed that firsthand. I was in Europe, Germany, Prague, every natural museum you can name. There's a beautiful specimen of everything you can think of. And this lady would show me the evidence, and you go everywhere in every natural museum. And she just refuses to acknowledge or attempt finding the truth.
Well, they don't want the answer, right? I mean, it's as simple as that. The answer is not palatable to them, and so it's easier to just say that it doesn't exist. They don't like the hominins, no. But another interesting one that's tough for them to draw a line between is the cetaceans, right? You've got ancient Indo-Hyas, and there's two really cool ways to link modern cetaceans to a land-dwelling ancestor. One is the astragalus, right? sort of a hinge joint in the limbs. And then the other is the involucrum, which is an inner ear structure that is found only exclusively in modern day cetaceans. That is it. Okay, so first of all, the involucrum exists in numerous different, steps, transitionals, if it were. Although transitional, all species are ultimately transitional. It's an endohyus, right? A little goat-sized hooved animal with an astragalus and an involucrum. And it's in Pakicetus and Ambulocetus alike. They both have this same structure. Again, no other artiodactyl has an involucrum. It doesn't exist in any of them. It's in every modern day cetacean and no living land animal. And yet all through the past, we find it not just in land animals, but in precedingly more aquatic animals that are living more along the coastline. Their bones are getting denser, which is what we see in modern Sirenians. It's indicative, and hippopotamuses. It's indicative of having a more semi-aquatic lifestyle. And not only is this happening, but at the same time, in these same organisms, they're losing the limbs. The behind limbs are being reduced until, look at something like Basilosaurus, they're like this big, like literally this big in a whale that's the size of a sperm whale. It's ridiculous. And so as of now, the most recent time that I went to the Ark Encounter, Ken Ham's museum, they have Pakicetus as a kind on the Ark. Pakicetus was brought by Noah and his pals onto the Ark because, boy, that's a hard sell, isn't it? Right? That whale evolution did not occur, and that modern cetaceans can't call back to a land-dwelling ancestor. They are being dragged one-knuckled every single step of the way, and eventually you're going to get one of two camps. It's either all miraculous and science is deceptive, or it's God just did it that way. Like, those are the only two options here. We'll see which way they go.
The problem is every single creationist tuned out 10 seconds into everything you just said.
Yeah, I know they did. I know they did, because I'm not James.
Erika, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you went through the Ark Encounter, were you on your own or were you guided?
Nope, I took my mom. I was the guided tour, and she had been on my case about swearing too much.
I had somebody under the employ of Answers in Genesis as my guide through the Ark Encounter.
Oh my God, how was that?
That was so much fun.
For you, for them, I can't even imagine.
So coming up to what they wanted to call the transitional species for the tyrannosaurs, which they would not admit were dromaeosaurs or would not conflate or even connect to dromaeosaurs. When I asked for where are their feathers? Because every dromaeosaur is now known to have feathers. Of course, I don't get no answer from Answers in Genesis. And when we come to Pakicetus, which, by the way, the artists that did that rendering, I thought did a beautiful job.
Oh, the models were impeccable. They all look great, honestly.
Yeah, and Pakicetus, it had a flattened kind of a beaver tail, which is consistent with the evolution of that animal. We don't have proof that their tails were flattened, but we know that because of their subsequent derivation, that at some point they flattened and at some point they shaped into flukes. And so the idea that Pakicetus would have something equivalent to a beaver tail was perfectly reasonable. So they're capable of understanding that. But when I confront them on the very point that you just made, this is an ideal example of a transitional species. Why the fuck would you have to put a transitional whale on the Ark?
On the Ark.
And if you're going to put this one on, why not Gutsick?
Yeah. Are they now admitting that there were like 5 million animals on the Ark, or like what are they doing now? I don't even know.
Oh, no. The argument is so much better than that. They get this. They don't accept microevolution because they don't accept that mutations can contribute to new genetic information. But they also say that they don't accept macroevolution, but they do accept that the evolution of new species is possible, new genus, new family, new orders. They accept the idea that, and they promote this, that they started with 1,400 original species, original kinds, and that from that we get however many millions of modern species
in like 1,000 years
immediately as soon as the boat lands.
Right.
So
they believe in hyper evolution.
90% of all biomass goes extinct as soon as they come out the door, and all of the speciation. super
No.
hyper caffeinated electro mega evolution happened immediately as soon as the boat landed.
And fast fossilization and everything.
God, we need to contextualize this too, though, because the general consensus with Answers in Genesis is that there is a single big ice age right after the flood. All right, we have a lot of proboscideans that are fossilized and indeed frozen solid in the north, so they have to account for proboscidean diversity, one of the most long-lived, longest gestating, and slowest growing animals, and they have to account for gomphotheres, mastodons, mammoths, Dinotherium. They have to account for all of it almost immediately after these suckers come off the ark. So one of my buddies has helped out with the channel a couple times, this guy Walker. We did the math. To account for the level of proboscidean diversity that we know of, just that we know of, every single proboscidean has to be a separate species than its mother. And when I say separate species, I mean in how we categorize it as impeccably distinct, because these are fossil organisms. So, it's absolutely absurd. And that's setting aside the fact that, you mentioned how are they fitting all the animals on the ark. That's not even their first problem.
Magic.
If you have these big animals, assume they're babies, assume a basal metabolic rate, right, where they are of a sleeping animal, and assume the highest calorie food. Just for the proboscideans, assuming we've got 15 proboscidean kinds on the ark, you're taking up roughly 60% of the space on that entire boat with alfalfa, just for the food for 15 kinds. It's not going to work, right? They don't care. You do all this work, and as you said, Dave, they don't listen. So, I've wasted a lot of my time.
I think the best response I've heard on this was from Ricky Gervais, the British comedian. It was a stand-up comedy on animals, and he said, one of the questions was posed is like how you get all these carnivorous animals to be on the same vessel as the other animals without mayhem. And he said, well, because in the time of need, we all pull together. That's the only explanation. It is so childish, to be honest, to think that. And I've got the first.
The lion knew that if he ate the gazelle, that there wouldn't be any more gazelles to eat ever again. So he held his appetite.
Exactly.
And ate an iguanodon instead.
Yeah.
Oh, Matt Powell is here. Isn't he the guy that thinks like there's air in space?
Somebody pretending to be Matt Powell.
He's the gay guy who hates gay people. I'm pretty sure is who that is.
Oh, I used to call him
There's a lot of
Ginger
those.
Twink, but I was told that was inappropriate.
What? That is...
I think Matt wants to step up in Kent's wake. He wants to come out from Kent's
No, he doesn't want to
Kent's
step
shadow.
up.
He doesn't. Yeah, he turned it down. There was an interview with him in Kent, and he was like, "Yeah, my family are leaving DAL. That's probably the smartest thing he's ever done. Smartest thing he's ever done."
You're the crappiest
apologist
apologist I've ever seen. Just keep quiet. It's ridiculous.
I got to say, a couple of years back, when they were going to do the American Atheist National Convention in Phoenix, Arizona, which it will be again in this April. But, COVID kind of set everything back. So we're 2 years behind schedule. Yes, American Atheist is going to be a national convention in Phoenix this year in 2023. But it was going to be a couple of years ago. And Matt Powell was pretending as if he was up for a debate. And so I said, okay, well, here's he was living in Phoenix at that time. And I said, well, this would be a great thing. We're going to do the American Atheist National Convention. Let's do just a bit of entertainment. Let's have your loopy ass come in and do a debate with me in front of 1,000 atheists in an audience. That would be hysterical. I would love that.
Yeah.
And for all of his bravado, all of his bluffing and puffing up, of course, he scurried away in cowardice and tried to say that I was cheating some way. But I got all of the emails. I can show the whole thread about how he ran away with his tail between his legs or up his ass. I don't know.
This guy, I don't know anything really that he does. Just somebody sent me one link to one of his videos like a while ago, and he was talking about Big Bang, and he's like, Big Bang is dumb because in a solar system, sometimes you can have one planet rotating the other way from the other planets.
What?
He said that. And
Hold on,
I think I wrote a comment being like, "You're a moron. You don't know anything about."
I got another
Big Bang
good one.
cosmology."
I saw a video once of Matt Powell holding a chicken, and he's sitting there holding this chicken, and he's talking about how crazy it is to suggest that this thing descends from dinosaurs, because how could a T-Rex's arms evolve backwards to become its legs?
Mm-hmm.
Talking about
do you guys think the whole thing the whole thing boils down to argument from personal incredulity. I don't understand how this works, so therefore it's a farce.
Yeah,
In
mixed with
Matt
willful
Powell's
ignorance.
case, it doesn't. Matt Powell knows that he's got a scam going. He's a professional liar. That's it. That's all. He knows that people, a lot of his followers, many of them are genuinely stupid and just believe what he says without question. But a lot of them want to make believe rather desperately, and they just want anything that'll reaffirm their bullshit belief. And he knows that they'll pay for whatever lie he tells them if it reinforces that belief. So that's what he is. He's a professional liar.
Yeah, I think you're giving him way too much credit. He's really stupid. I don't know
Little
what you're
column
saying.
A.
Well, I know that Kent Hovind is profoundly stupid, so I'm going to guess that Powell is too. But I have to say that Powell
Why
is
are you so
probably
mean
smarter
to
than
me?
Hovind
Look at this guy.
because Powell moved on to the Hovind cult compound and realized a little while into it that I need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Oh, he did. I don't know the drama. I knew that I saw him sitting on in the room there. I don't know like what their
Yeah,
involvement is
he's
now.
hightailing it, dude. He is hightailing it
Okay.
out of there. Smartest
So,
things ever
I
done.
mean,
That's smart. So that's one smart thing he did. That's one smart thing.
to
I'll
stop
give you credit for that. Man.
the first comment, one beautiful thing about all disciplines of sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, is something that Karl Popper has added some time ago, which is falsifiability. A strong theory, just like Einstein came up with the general relativity, and he said, if I'm wrong, this would not happen, but my calculation is going to say that light is going to bend around the sun, and therefore it will look shifted. And he was vindicated, and it was falsified at the time. Can we just provide the audiences here, starting with Erika, things that we can use to falsify the theory of evolution?
Oh gosh, I mean, that's going to be really tough, honestly. I've been asked this before.
I can go
and,
first.
like, yeah, you go first, Aron. I mean,
There are certain things that we predict and expect with evolution. So, for example, when we argue about the transitional species, and people say, "Well, Darwin predicted there would be transitional species, and we ain't never found none," except that he predicted and described two of them specifically that we did in fact find.
Plus
And
a
we found-
thousand others.
He gave a description for two of them. One of them was found within 2 years of his publication, so he already knew that his theory was vindicated while he was still alive. That was Archaeopteryx lithographica. And then there was Australopithecus afarensis, which wasn't identified as a transitional species until a century later. When Darwin died, that one was still called the missing link. And so now we found, just within Archaeopteryx, just within the transition of dinosaurs to birds, we found myriad transitions, and also between apes to man, again, myriad links. But those were the first two that were specifically identified, described by Darwin himself. But you can't get the creationists to admit, okay, well, this is what he said, and this is what we found. Okay, well, I'll give you that one. No, that'll never happen, because it's all about make-believe.
Well, a good start would be find the Cambrian bunny, right? Find an organism that is, completely out of place where it should be, and where it shouldn't be, excuse me, and then manage to sort of account for every possible intrusion into that layer. But, I've been asked before, like, how would you falsify evolution? At this stage, it's going to be tough because thousands of papers, perhaps tens of thousands of papers every single year, studies rely on the assumptions of evolutionary theory, and their hypotheses come to fruition. We base our agricultural industry on it. We base our medical industry on it. We rely on the theory of evolution for so much of our modern understanding and of science and of biology, rather, and our lifestyle. So how could you falsify it at this point? The mechanism, I don't think you could, honestly. I think it is as solid as our ideas of germ theory, if not significantly more solid.
Every development of antibiotic resistance is a vindication of evolutionary biology.
Precisely.
By the way,
when I go into PubMed and I type in, evolution, I get tens of thousands of responses, 74,566 replies.
Well, and each study that relies on a previous study further vindicates the results of the former, right? Assuming it's making the same assumptions and is sort of predicated on the results.
The reason I asked this question, Erika, is not to. I completely understand that it's solid right now, evolution, but it's been said that a theory, whatever theory is going to be posed, it needs to come with a set of falsifications, even though they might not happen or they might not be able to, every time you test them, they're always there. But if it doesn't, then it becomes a non-scientific theory, just like an intelligent design. It cannot be falsified.
We do have that. I mean, I did a video called Falsifying Phylogeny, which is actually talking about exactly how to do that. So evolution proposes or explains that, that biodiversity is going to happen this way. And so there are certain things that it cannot do, that an intelligent designer could do. So an intelligent designer can take, we always hear the analogy of cars coming into this, right? Well, the Volkswagen Beetle for the longest time was an air-cooled rear engine, then it became a water-cooled front engine made out of a completely different alloy, right? So it's aluminum then, and now it's nickel and something else. So an intelligent designer can change everything about it. It's still a Beetle, right? It's just everything has been fundamentally changed. But in biology, that can't happen. It can only build on whatever has emerged already, and accentuate or influence that. So one of the things that cannot happen is that you cannot get, because birds are dinosaurs and therefore reptiles, you cannot get the wings of a reptile mounted onto the body of a mammal. So the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz, or a Pegasus, or a griffin, none of those things are possible with evolution. So, and it may sound ridiculous, but you find a Pegasus, that's one way of disproving evolution. Show something that cannot have evolved according to evolutionary mechanisms.
Because you morphologically took something from this branch and merged them in a way that is completely incompatible with the history of biological life.
The best they've got is the platypus, which exactly fits evolution, because all mammals were originally monotremes, and they had a lower body temperature, and the bill that the duck-billed platypus has is not homologous with a bird's bill. It's very different. It's structurally entirely different.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I cut you off, Dave. Go ahead.
At this point, after 150 years or whatever of discovering thousands upon thousands of species and seeing how they all fall flawlessly into this evolutionary tree, the falsifiability would be a deity floating down to earth and saying, haha, gotcha, I actually did it. Here's a video of me doing everything. Like, that's how ridiculous it would have to be.
Well, right. I mean, that's kind of where I was trying to head, right? Is because at this point, if evolution is to be falsified and everything that entails, you have to propose something else to explain all of the data that has up until this point matched pristinely with evolutionary theory, right? All of that has to be accounted for. When a previous idea gets booted out, right, or found to be, I guess, an inferior to this new idea that's come along, the new idea has to also explain all the old data. That's kind of the point. So evolution has been falsifiable every single step along the way here. The problem is we're 150 years of steps in, and it hasn't been falsified yet. So how do you? I mean, even from like a statistics standpoint, what are the odds that we get seemingly such a robust support for an idea that is, if the creationists are to be believed, completely wrong this entire time?
That's where we're at with like the intelligent design movement. Like some of the faces that are trying to be the most credible is they sort of accept old Earth, and then they accept like all of these events happened and these species emerged at these times, but they just kind of lie about small details and go, okay, this was impossible, which ends up resulting in a god who is just like walking along this timeline and going, okay, I'll create this now. And then, oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to create some of these other things now. And it's just like, I can't believe you guys worship this god. He's such a loser. Like, why can't you just make a universe where all of like everything would have happened according to how we understand scientifically? He's just sitting there like, oh, let's try something new now. Like,
I mean, right, like that version, yes, to be certain. I mean, even intelligent design, as far as I'm concerned, has been falsified. Speaking of falsifiability, because back in the day, there was a very clear prediction made by intelligent design, right? So after we get the genomes of a great many organisms sequenced right around 2005 and dipping into 2010 and beyond. A very weak counter argument was made by the intelligent design community. They come out and they're like, well, it's common design. Okay, well, it just looks like evolution. All right, well, sure, you want to say it's common design in functional sequences and that things look alike because you're repurposing parts. Fine. Why is there a nested hierarchy in unconstrained sequences? Or sorry, opposite. Why do we have our non-functional DNA also falling into a nested hierarchy? This should not be the case. This means that DNA that it doesn't do anything also falls into a nested hierarchy. If things are only looking like they're related because of design, because of the functional aspects of the DNA, then the non-functional DNA should not fall into a nested hierarchy. This is a very simple prediction that they went out on a limb and effectively made, and it's been blasted to smithereens, right? The nested hierarchy is ubiquitous across the entire genome. So what are they still out here talking about? Someone help me here, right?
I think our intelligent design never fitted the criteria of scientific theory to start with, because it's the whole thing is predicated on the rejection of evolution, and that alone doesn't give you a scientific theory. It doesn't predict. It doesn't have falsifiability. It doesn't tell you the mechanics or the details of it. All it says, irreducible complexity and irreducible specificity. And I don't understand how this has happened, and therefore there must be a designer in the background. But I cannot explain to you all the flaws in those supposedly perfect designs. I don't think it ever fitted a scientific theory.
Well,
I've often said that intelligent design meets exactly none of the criteria required of a scientific theory.
Yeah, but they know that, and so them trying to appear as scientific as possible have actually caved. Like Behe did outline guidelines for falsifiability. Then, of course, they were immediately falsified, right? Because it's not nice. So structures were shown, structures that met his criteria for irreducible complexity were observed to have evolved. So it's in the trash can, right? Irreducible complexity is in the trash can. He set the guidelines; they were met. They were observed to evolve. So, but they keep actually, I don't hear them pushing it too much now, but I think they still do. But,
I still hear their followers bring it up, and I have to remind them that every one of the arguments brought forth for irreducible complexity was disproven scientifically before it was also shown to be fraudulent in a court of law.
Exactly. Yeah, the Kitzmiller v. Dover, they didn't do too well with that one. So, yeah.
Well, the comment is pretty much what Aron and I were talking off air. If you come with a presupposition of some sort, you will never be able to have that logical discourse where you can convince somebody of something, unless something happens to them drastically that will shift their views or change their minds.
But you presuppose there's no God. That's what they say, right?
Yeah, we were all former believers. Most of us were former believers, so we did not pre-propose this. This is a conclusion we came to after analyzing the evidence.
I just become completely uninterested the second that you're allowing miracles or inspired scripture to dictate what you believe and why you believe it. Like young Earth creationism and creationism in general is only interesting to me insofar as it proposes that this can be supported scientifically, and that's where you can come in and have some fun. I say, okay, well, you say that, let's look at it. Can it be, or is it completely annihilated at every turn? And we all know where that ends up. But once we start allowing for miracles here and miracles there, and that part I'm just going to interpret in this way. It's like I think it's boring. I'm not interested anymore.
I'd like to take this opportunity to fangirl just a little bit. I'm delighted that I'm on a panel with Gutsick Gibbon and Professor Dave, because I have huge admiration for both of them. Now, as I mentioned to you privately before either of them came on camera, and I said I was going to repeat this once we were on the air, I have huge respect for Professor Dave because everybody wants to bring up James fucking Tour because he has a degree, and that means he's better than me. But they also use the fact that Kent Hovind has a mail order catalog degree, and that's supposed to mean that he's better than me too. The fact that their arguments are complete shit doesn't seem to matter to these people. And Erika is a rare case in that this is somebody who is really passionate about promoting the science, but also simultaneously understands the necessity of countering apologetics, because there's very few people, particularly in her generation, and probably worse. I say particularly in her generation, but it's actually probably worse in my generation. Most people who advocate the science don't know that it is necessary to also counter apologetics. So I'm very, very happy with her.
Thank you, Aron. Jesus, I wasn't expecting the compliment. No, it's always an honor to be hanging out with you guys. I mean, Aron, I was watching your videos before I ever even made a Reddit account talking about the creationism stuff. So I think I actually emailed you like 5 or 6 years ago asking you for a source on something. You got right back to me, and I was like, oh my God, like he answered my emails. And
the idea that you were asking me for a resource.
No, you had this cool chart, and I remember you got it right to me. It was great. And obviously being on here with Professor Dave, I mean, like the material that Dave puts out there is just so systematic in the destruction. It's so systematic, and
Somebody had to do it.
Yes, and I don't need to do it now. You did it.
Refer to my videos. Yeah.
I'm so glad you did the tour thing too, because like my stuff, I stick to a lot of, I mean, I'm pretty restricted in what I guess I'm specialized in. And when we get down into the abiogenesis stuff, and particularly biochemistry, I took
it's a different world. Yeah, it's a different world.
I just don't, and you know, systems.
It's very niche. Yeah.
That.
I didn't know much about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been very helpful to
James also still does not know anything about systems chemistry.
I know he doesn't, because I watched
really
videos, and listen, man, it's not good that I know about systems chemistry and he is not knowing synthetic chemist. Like,
I mean, I was done with the guy. I had moved on, but they had not. So this last series was astounding what he was doing. So I was like, yeah, that's not gonna fly. So I did what I did.
It's you know, it's just interesting to me. All of these guys, you know, they act like they want a conversation. They act like they want to hash this out, and that they're only after the science. And then it's really telling how every single time you give them the material, your sources that's backing up what you're saying. And I'm saying this in relation to your stuff with Jennifer, but in my own experience as well, they never read it. They never read it. You know, I mean, it's not like,
or they pretend to.
Yeah, I mean, they'll pretend to, right? Or they'll throw off some you know half cocked claim about the abstract, you know. And God,
what's interesting is in the case of James is what he'll do the precise opposite is he'll flex by diving into the supplementals and go, see, Dave, you don't read the supplementals, but then he'll just either lie about it or just botch it completely. Like he'll try to interpret an NMR spectrum and just like get it wrong. And his fans are like, he's so smart. He's the best chemist and he's the best scientist in the whole world. And I was like, dude, he can't even read a carbon NMR spectrum. He can't even read this thing. Like he doesn't even know that basaltic rock contains magnesium. He's complaining about, Benner's washing off the magnesium. The glass has magnesium in it, you idiot. Like
it's so telling too, because like, you know, I'm around a lot of people with PhDs these days, and I don't know a single one of them that would speak that confidently.
I know.
About a field that's adjacent to their own, let alone one that is several fields over. And
that's the narcissism. That's the narcissism. He really thinks he's like the genius of the world. He really thinks that he can understand this stuff just magically, just because he wants to, you know. But
I got to add to something that Erika just said. I mean, I was on an expedition. One of the highlights of my life was that I spent a couple of weeks on a paleontological expedition in South Africa in the Karoo, and I was with 10 other guys on their invitation, who all had the name Professor Blankety Blank PhD, and I was delighted that not only that they invited me, you know, lowly YouTuber to be there as their videographer, but also that they treated me as an associate, which was just astounding. But when I was in the field, I was talking to a geologist, and that's his profession. He's a geologist. All the paleontologists are outside of earshot, you know. But I asked this geologist about how they date the area, the strata that we're standing on right now. He refused to answer. I know that he knows the answer. but he won't give it because he knows that there are people more expert than him that by the end of the day I could get their input instead.
I asked someone I asked someone who I'm in contact with, a PhD, maybe not in my department, about their opinion on a paper that had come out on mandibular diversity in hominids. He goes, no, I don't do mandibles, I do teeth. Right? He won't talk about the mandibles.
Yeah.
Where the teeth sit, because he's like, I don't want to step on any toes. I have my thoughts, but at the same time, and it's like, yeah, I mean, is that not the point of specialization, right? You have a broad scope of knowledge, but when there's someone who may be better to ask, that's who you go to, because no one can be an expert in anything, right?
Well, they can be an expert in one thing, right? Yeah.
You can be. Oh, I said anything?
In
I meant
anything,
everything. Yeah, no one can be
in everything, right?
Everything, right? You specialize and you rely on others. That's why we have experts, right?
Right.
That's the point.
So for people who fall for apologists, the scientists who are explaining evolution and all the things that they don't want to understand, they're worthless. But then the one scientist they latch onto must be brilliant in all fields, right? That's
right.
Pretty much how these guys operate.
Guys, I want to address this question because I think it's going to put us back on the some of the challenging questions against, supposedly against evolution. And I think this one is William Dembski, one of the co-founders of the intelligent design back in the day in the 90s. And I think he used to be a computer scientist and calculated like a ridiculous number of because it's always the conversation always to do about the chance of this is happening is so remote that must have a designer, and has calculated
scary numbers.
Yeah, something
Okay,
to the power.
let me just jump in. If I know that the other two are going to have answers to this, but I mean, what they're talking about is the argument from improbability fallacy. The first problem with that is that they don't understand that these are deterministic processes. So the evolution is not completely unguided. There's this thing called natural selection, which means that certain advantageous mutations are going to be favored and so forth. So you're going to get better adaptations down the road, right? So, that's the first part of it. But they don't understand that there are these processes at work. So they think that everything is just a roll of the dice, and so you have to roll the dice so many times and come up with the right number all the time. I don't know if it's deliberate. I don't know if it's insane. I don't know if it's dishonest. I don't know if it's all of the above, but it's not smart in any case.
Yeah, more so though, it's this kind of coded language, ironically. But this whole subfield of apologetics where they're talking about it's a code, like a computer code, and we all know that humans make computer code, so there has to be a god that made the computer code. It's a total non-starter. It doesn't mean anything. Like this whole thing of like information is a substance. Where did the information come? It's just a sequence of nucleotides. Right, information is just a pattern that we observe in matter. You can get information. You can take a collection of molecules in the gas phase, and give every single one of them a vector, a momentum vector. That's information. It's atoms or molecules flying around random. You can assign a set of information to that state. It doesn't mean anything, right? We're talking about a sequence of nucleotides. If there is a mechanism by which nucleic acids can form, they will have some sequence of nucleotides. That's the information. That's it. There's nothing else to talk about here.
I feel, Dave, there's a conflation between words like randomness, chance, and impossible, because to my understanding, random, there's nothing magical about a random number. It's still the set is defined, and it's just a rotation and an alteration of the sequences to come up with different formats of it. But it's within the defined set of numbers that exist, and therefore inevitably it is going to happen at some point when you keep alternating all these different options. So there's nothing magical about this.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of different sequences, some of which resulted in the production of interesting proteins that had a novel function. And then those sequences are selected for. That's it.
So there's nothing impossible about. What about? Do you think panspermia could be a thing? That the fact that the first cells or the first precursors of life have come out of space. Nothing supernatural here. It could have happened.
Well, no, we got to clarify what panspermia means. I mean, so all of the basic chemical components have been found in meteorites. That doesn't mean that life was found in meteorites. And it doesn't mean that life was necessarily brought here from another place, which is what the idea of panspermia basically is about. So everything that is in the original life studies, all of that could have occurred here. Yes, it can occur in space, and it has obviously occurred in space, but it didn't need to. It can all happen here.
Well, not all of it. I mean, the basic building blocks are found in space. So yes, that's obviously true.
So the ingredients and then the pie got baked on Earth.
I think. Well, another option though is because it is definitely possible for an impact to strike another body in the solar system. Like let's say Mars, rudimentary life was brewing on Mars. You get an impact, and some biological material gets delivered from Mars to Earth. Right. That's actually, I was writing a pilot for science. I shouldn't have said that. That was an idea I had for science fiction. Never mind. I didn't say that. But anyway, that is more, I think, akin to, I don't think panspermia people are implying that life literally formed in the vacuum of space, where that would be too much. Although the basic biomolecules certainly are. But at any rate, I mean, I don't, like Aron said, I don't subscribe to panspermia. It's not needed, right? We're elucidating all the mechanisms by which life could have arisen on Earth, right? You just need water and molecules.
I think too, regarding the earlier stuff with the code, I was looking it up because I couldn't remember the video, but John Perry of Stated Casually and Stated Clearly has an excellent video on signaling theory, which goes over not only how do you get, information as we understand it, right, or as we assign it rather, but how do you get these communication systems, quote unquote, that lead to transcription, translation, protein synthesis, DNA replication, all of these important things that are vital for much more advanced life than we're talking about at the abiogenesis stage. And he's got a great lit review in there that I thought was very helpful. And just to tag it on, all of this boils down to like the incredulity of how do you get such complex relationships? Okay, I don't know a single young Earth creationist or pseudoscientist in general who wouldn't look at an ecosystem and say that an ecosystem forms naturally, right? And of course it does, because we see this happen with primary and secondary succession when a new area sort of goes back to, is reclaimed by nature or what have you. And the relationships involved in an ecosystem are incredibly complex and interdependent, and yet they do form, and these different parts of it are reliant on one another. There are plenty of different complex sort of systems that we see in nature that we observe forming today, and we have a really nice scaffold for understanding how that happened in the past as well with regard to
That's actually a really good point, though. I actually haven't even thought of that kind of example, because what you're saying is they're accepting that all those complex interrelationships arose naturally, and yet if you removed, say, one key species from that food web, it would all fall apart. That's a good one. I'm going to use that.
Hey, all yours.
Yeah.
To me, all of these sort of analogies are very much like a William Paley type of analogy. It's teleological. It's argument from design. It's the Boeing 747 emerging out of a garage after a tornado, which is the silliest thing I've ever heard. And it just keeps rotating around that. It's like, life is so complex. It looks like I think the funniest one was Ray Comfort's, almost like an oral education about oral sex, holding a banana and telling, how the banana's curved to exactly fit their hand, not even knowing the banana that we're eating today has been artificially selected. Bananas are not even like that.
God, yeah, that's vintage Ray Comfort. That's
not just bananas, like pretty much everything in the produce section. I actually had to tell somebody that today. They were like, "Oh, all this perfect fruit." Dude, we invented all of this. We made all of it.
And the meat too. Go past the produce section. That's also us, right?
Yeah.
Like selecting for that kind of meat. The marbling in your steak is decades of selection. So.
Yeah.
Well, Derek Lambert is in the house, so a good friend of mine, and I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with
yes,
Derek, and he's asking whether he wants to catch up with you guys at some point and saying hello to everyone.
Derek, I want to talk soon. I'm bad about communicating right now because I'm getting absolutely slammed in my IRL stuff. But yes, I would love to chat again soon about whatever. Just gotta find a time.
Where are you at in your PhD course at the moment, Erika?
So I'm at the end of year 2. I'm about to start my comps. So I'm done. I'm almost done with coursework. I'm very close. I've got one more class that I want to. I could finish this semester with my coursework, but I'm trying to save it because there's a gross anatomy class that's offered that I really want to take. That'll get me like partially accredited to teach anatomy. So
Right.
that's a nice backup to have. So I'm kind of pushing off finishing my coursework with regard to that. But that'll take my comps, and then after I pass my comps and pitch my dissertation, I'll be ABD, and then I'll have to do my dissertation. The easiest step to PhD.
And then I'll be able to say that Dr. Gutsick Gibbon
there you
asked
go.
me for references.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, you'll be like, yeah, I'll talk to my doctorate holding.
And of course, Aron, you've recently got your paleontology degree as well.
I did. It took forever because I'm a family man struggling
Yeah.
to work, a working class kind of guy. And it took forever to do that. It was only of May this year. I've been taking classes toward this degree for almost 20 years
Wow.
in my spare time.
Wow.
But I finally got it. When
Lots of respect for that, pursuing knowledge to the very end. But unfortunately, did you find that most of the stuff you were studying for, you kind of knew through your own efforts, and you just have to have the degree because that's the world we live in?
I don't want to be arrogant about that because I got something useful out of almost every class. When you take a degree plan, they want you to take a bunch of other classes that you think are unrelated to what you're going to study. But you'd be surprised. In my field, I was surprised at how much relevance all of this other stuff had. I mean, I'm reading stuff from 13th century Japan, and I'm finding that it's relevant to what I'm studying now. So, I mean, there was an awful lot of that. The only class I didn't like was the only class I didn't get anything out of was sociology. That was the only class that was like, I didn't need this one. And it turned out I literally didn't need this one because I'd already taken philosophy earlier and completely forgotten that I had taken that class.
And Dave, of course, you've given up a career almost in teaching, but you're still ended up being a teacher, but in a different type of realm.
Oh, I didn't give anything up. I did not want to be a teacher. That was just, you got to make money, right? Somehow, everybody's got to make money.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, Dave, if you were a teacher?
Instead
my wife was a professional middle school teacher.
Right.
It was bad in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it all right, especially teaching OChem at a university because it was adults, and so they were eager to learn and appreciated that I could explain it well. But no, I wanted to be a musician. I still just want to be a musician, but you got to make money, and I mean, I don't know what I would be doing right now if I hadn't stumbled upon YouTube. I mean, this has definitely changed a lot of things for me in a great way. So
you're helping a lot of people, Dave. You're helping a lot of people. So you're definitely adding value to this miserable universe that we're living in. But we're back on track on evolution now, and I've got a challenging question to the panel. And this one here I hear a lot from Muslims. There is something significant in the Quran talks about the creation of everything in male and female forms, because this is the order of the word. Obviously, now that we know better, we know that the word male female is an emergent property and an advanced area in the evolution of reproduction, because this is not how things started. So they have
to try explaining emergence to a creation.
What? We're not compute. But they go, how did the male and female separately evolve at the same time to be able to mate and have intercourse?
The same species evolved twice, but in two forms.
What I loved about that was about the way Ray Comfort distorted that when he was on the 700 Club talking to oh fuck! I can't remember his name. The guy who was always wrong about everything, but that doesn't really narrow it down, does it?
Yeah,
he was on the 700, and he says, "Well, let's pretend I'm an evolutionist, and there's a Big Bang, and evolution begins, or life begins, because those two are directly related. They're not separated by 10 billion years, right? So there's a Big Bang, and life begins.
Yeah,
right. And then suddenly a dog evolves. It's got eyes, legs, and a tail." Right. So what is he thinking about? A lump of hamburger sat around for millions of years and suddenly developed eyes, legs, and a tail? And then it had to go look for a female dog because, you know, the male is always the basis of the species, right? So this lump of hamburger sat around for millions of years, suddenly grew eyes, legs, and a tail, and went looking around for another cocker spaniel to go breed with, right?
And it was there too.
Yeah. Now this guy has been arguing on the beach for 20 some odd years, made millions of dollars. He has a 2-story beach house in Malibu by telling this fucking lie. I get it. I'd be out there. If I didn't have ethics, I'd be out there telling the same lies he is just to make that kind of money. But he knows that what he's talking about is a complete straw man, that this is not evolution, that we don't believe there was ever a lump of hamburger that became a male dog.
But this is what blows my mind is like there are so many species, including so many animals that are hermaphroditic.
Yes.
Right. They're male and female, and they right. And so it's very clear that the sexual reproduction arose, and then there was a divergence. Right. There's the sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism was an adaptation. Right. Sexual dimorphism evolved after this concept of the male and female gonads. It's not that hard to understand. There's like flatworms and things that are alive right now that reproduce this way. They're hermaphrodites.
And populations evolve, right? It's not one individual is the first male, and the second individual is the first female, and then they, go get busy, right? Like populations.
So reproduction as making exact copies of yourself is always going to be vulnerable to certain things, because once you attack a population with, let's say, a virus or a bacteria or whatever, if this population is exactly identical, then it's quite easy to annihilate. But if you end up with a situation where 50% of the DNA is shared between male and female, you end up with copying errors that will lead to mutations and variations in species that will end up with
too. I mean, even outside just of mutations, recombination shuttles.
Right. Greater genetic variety, much more rapidly. Yeah. I mean, it's like, look, obviously sexual reproduction evolved. And so you have what we now consider the male and female gametes, and then that diverged such that male was expressed in half the population of that species, female expressed in half the population that species. The genetic information for both types of gametes are there in every single organism. It's just about how they're expressed, right? I mean,
we also have to throw out the important thing that there are species, there are even vertebrate species that can switch back and forth between sexual and asexual reproduction. And that there are asexual microbes that have most, or if not all, of the capacity for sexual reproduction. They just don't use it because they don't need to.
Yes, because sexual reproduction is quite taxing, isn't it? It requires a lot of energy. A lot of people say, well, sexual reproductions and things like the brain evolving is a little bit of a taxing situation because these are very energy hungry, the mechanics.
Well, there's the energy in the actual mating, but then there's also competing with other individuals. There's seeking out viable individuals, right? These competition plays such a massive role when you get sort of high, in certain areas of multicellular life. Competition is just the name of the game, right? And when you got organisms that are social, that gets dialed up to 11.
All right, guys, we're getting into the last half an hour of the conversation, so feel free.
I've got to throw in something right now.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, because you had posted when you were advertising this thing, you said that the evolution is a fact, and somebody wanted to say, and I've heard this apologetics argument a number of times, that this is a bait and switch thing, that we would show proof of microevolution and then use that as evidence of macroevolution. And I would like Erika and Dave to help me with explaining what if you could understand the basis of microevolution. Macroevolution is a foregone conclusion. That's an inevitability.
Well, yeah, I mean, microevolution, right? We're talking about changes within a species, and when we say change within a species, change in allelic frequencies over time, mutations, variation. We're talking about the mechanisms at play in normal, everyday evolutionary mechanisms. You got genetic drift, you've got gene flow. So you get enough of those that accumulate, right? And you're gonna get speciation. As Dave and Aron both said earlier in different ways, this is an inevitability, right? Because variation will always exist because of the nature of reproduction, the nature of division, self-division, and the nature of mutations, right? That variation will always exist, and variation will always be selected for in different ways in different environments, because there will be differential reproductive success, excuse me. So, organisms that have a characteristic that makes them more fit, even if it's a percentage of a percentage point, are going to differentially reproduce at a greater rate as compared to another individual in their population, right? Microevolution, sure. And let it happen long enough, and speciation just happens.
Yep.
I mean,
Macroevolution.
Dave, pouring water in a cup, right?
Right.
Like,
The people who accept microevolution and not macroevolution are saying, "Oh, I can fill up a cup of water from this faucet, but not a swimming pool." Right?
yeah.
Let's wait a while.
It's
Fill it up.
Simulation, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and these kinds of people, right? They do accept speciation, right? It's just that we always come back around to the same conversation. Well, it's still a dog. Well, it's still a fly. Well, and then you realize that there's a lot more to talk about than just the difference between microevolution and macroevolution with this particular individual.
Right.
You got to start a lot lower.
Right, because here's the problem. Microevolution can be observed rapidly. It can be observed directly, whereas macroevolution takes a while. So in order to demonstrate that macroevolution has occurred, you have to go into the past, because we can look a long time in the past. And so
what I like to do is I like to ask these people if they understand that we are a mammal.
Yeah.
Because most people will accept that we are a mammal, not understanding what the rest of the ramifications of that are.
Mhm.
I could start with animal. Do you think we are an animal? And then I have to bring up Ecclesiastes 3:18-21, which, as well as any dictionary, which would prove that we are an animal. But they want to draw some line of distinction, and they reject that they're a primate. So I have to give the definition of a primate. And of course, they don't accept any taxonomic class except maybe vertebrate. That's the only one that, okay, well, yeah, I have a backbone. But that don't mean I'm
Which
an
they
animal.
usually don't. That's the irony. They're pretty spineless.
Weirdly, I've had more success with getting people to be okay with being a mammal than an animal, right? Like, not knowing, of course, that mammal is a class. It's more specific. By agreeing to that, you're agreeing to everything, taxonomically above it. But, again, there are greater problems at play.
Well, if you're going to get your taxonomy from the Bible, then bats are birds. So.
Sure.
And lobsters are fish, and so are whales.
Yeah, and so are whales, right?
Yeah, sea turtles are fish, but tortoises are not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going on here as well with this desire for human exceptionalism, right? Like, people want so badly to be set apart from everything else, to be something that is wholly unique. And not like everything else. And whether that's because they just want to be special or because it absolves them of responsibility for, other life on this earth, I don't really know. I think it's probably a little bit of both. But, I study primates. I study extant primates and extinct primates. And I have a very difficult time coming up with anything that categorically separates humans from the rest of the animal kingdom.
It's so dumb, though, because we are super special. We are the most super special primate. We are the most super special animal. Look at what we're doing. We are super special, but we're also all those things. Like, what's the problem?
Well, and I would argue,
speaking of special, I'm seeing in the comments that whoever's pretending to be Matt Powell official is arguing with Neil, the 604 atheist. Hey, would you like to talk about evolution? Yeah. Talk to Neil about. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about that to any of the three people on the panel here, because who's going to walk away butthurt from that, right?
It's just going to turn into another biology lesson, right? Because I mean, it always becomes so elucidating on like the background that that a lot of these folks have in it, and like, there's nothing wrong with not being supremely well educated in a topic as long as you're willing to learn about it. There's plenty of things that I don't know shit about, but if I don't know it, I'm not going to come up with three people who do
and say it's fake.
Trying to teach them about it, right? Yeah. That's where the disconnect is.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine not knowing something very, very thoroughly and just professing that this is going to be your opinion and that no one can change your mind?
No, I'd be so embarrassed. I'd be mortified, because the second someone proved me wrong, I'd look like a big idiot.
They don't care for that. They don't care for that.
It's just not good.
I've got two challenging questions before we get into the last half an hour where people can start asking their questions. It's going to be Q&A type of format. But the first question is, we say birds, especially I think the T-Rex is one ancestor of all birds that we have right now. If 63 million years ago all dinosaurs were extinct, how do we have birds who have the ancestry of dinosaurs that were extinct some 63 million years ago?
Well, birds appeared before 63 million years ago, or 65 million years ago if we're talking about when dinosaurs went extinct. I mean, we had birds, I believe, in the Jurassic. I mean,
Yep.
birds that would have looked very familiar, although they would probably open their mouth and they would still have teeth. Or they might have, some of the
And they still had unfused wing fingers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, claw-tipped wings, as it were, colloquially. So they would look familiar, but it isn't from, the dinosaurs, that your big theropod non-avian dinosaurs that modern birds descend, at least not the ones that lived at the Cretaceous.
Right.
Probably something significantly earlier, early Jurassic, late Triassic. We're talking about a sort of archosaur-looking critter.
So not all birds are the offspring of dinosaurs, but some are, like apparently chicken.
No, all birds.
Yeah,
all birds are literally living dinosaurs. They're the last lineage of dinosaurs.
So
what happened was birds emerged before the end of the Mesozoic era, in the mid-Jurassic. There was a lineage of dinosaurs that we recognize now as birds. Most of them had the ability to fly. And this apparently aided them when the shit hit the fan and killed all of the other dinosaurs that were massive, that required huge dietary intake and all of that. And birds were able to fly from one tragic environment to another to skirt complete destruction. And most of the lines of birds in the Cretaceous went extinct also. Only 2 lineages survived. So there were several that went extinct along with the rest of the dinosaurs. Only 2 lineages of birds. The Peonace and Peonace and Neonace were the only ones to survive. And from the Paleonace we get ostriches and emus and cassowaries and that sort of thing. And then we have all of the other modern birds, which begin ironically with chickens and ducks.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people don't appreciate this, and I didn't for a very long time, but there was quite a bit of mammal diversity going on during the Mesozoic, during the tail end of the Mesozoic, and even a little bit at the end of the middle, sort of at the end of the Jurassic. We had a lot of different types of mammals. They were just all very small. In fact, they were really, really good at being small. That's something that was brought to my attention. I just read the Rise and Reign of the Mammals, which is a really good kind of layman book that I found very helpful for talking about mammals. But hordes of mammals went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. Multituberculates got absolutely annihilated. A lot of our marsupials were destroyed. I mean, the ones that made it through through a combination of chance and lifestyle. It seems as though there was a really big bias towards burrowers, and it seems as that kind of went for the birds as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Aron, because you might know the bird evolution a little bit better than I do, but if memory serves, it was riverside burrowers, not unlike some of the aquatic waterfowl that we have today. Birds that are living in, slightly underground in these little burrows on the sides of rivers. And the same goes for mammals that manage to make it through. And this might have shielded them, one, from the massive just catastrophe that befell the earth for the days and weeks following the initial impact. We're talking about heating the air to, like, globally speaking, like pretty high for a couple hours immediately after the bolide impact. But also, these guys would have thrived on insects, which are really, really hardy. You can't survive on insects if you're big, like if you're huge, unless you're eating things like hymenopterans, like sort of colonial insects that are all found in one place. Everybody made it through, was small, burrowing, and lucky, I would say.
Yeah. So Hesperornis is one lineage of birds that went away in the Cretaceous. They survived on fish. They were, imagine a 6-foot penguin kind of a thing, except that they were really good at swimming. I mean, differently than penguins were. But suddenly there's no fish because the oceans have experienced this huge travesty. So they're all gone. And you often hear the thing that nothing with a body weight more than 40 pounds survived that age. That's not entirely true. Crocodiles did. Yeah. But crocodiles had a couple of advantages because they were exactly on the opposite end of the scale from dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were the hypervelocity, supercharged, high-tuned sports models. They were pound per pound quicker, faster, and stronger than mammals of the same weight, just hands down. But because of that, when they go on dire times and they don't have they can't find the sustenance to maintain those hyperactive bodies, they died out. Whereas crocodiles can eat once a month and still be okay. And then crocodiles also bury their eggs. So crocodilians, their eggs being buried, even if all the crocodiles died, their eggs would still hatch and the crocodilians would come out and they'd still survive into the next generation. So that's what happened with a lot of these. It was just a lucky happenstance of the type of design. Why did turtles live? They bury their eggs. Why did crocodiles live? They bury their eggs. And very few things that had a high octane diet were able to survive unless they were really tiny.
I think you could make a good argument, like a good analogy like this. Like, let's say there was a big catastrophe today that annihilated, pretty much all of the family Canidae, except for red foxes, for whatever reason. Let's say red foxes make it through. And in, 30 million years, red foxes are like, they've evolved into these big, tanky looking, almost hyenodont looking guys. And people look at those and they say, these are the last of the canids, right? Like, why did they survive and others didn't? Talking about the relationship with the dinosaurs and the birds, this thing is still a canid, right? It may not look like the other canids that lived, 30 million years before it when everything went extinct, but it's still a canid, and its ancestor lived at the same time of all those other canids. It just so happened that this particular canid made it through. The adaptations that it underwent afterwards are sort of no consequence to what it was in its relationship with the others back then. Yeah. That's where we're at with birds right now.
So what I'm trying to get at is with the 5 great extinctions, that there isn't really a total annihilation. There always, maybe in Jeff Goldblum's voice, life finds a way.
Oh, you got close in the Permian. We got close. We're talking a hair's breadth away from complete sterilization during the Permian. It's not complete sterilization of multicellular life, let's say.
Whoever is pretending to be Matt Powell, I'm seeing in the chat, and I realize there's a bit of delay, so this was probably 2 or 3 minutes ago. But whoever's pretending to be Matt Powell here, it just challenged me to show one evidence for evolution, because they never know how to count evidence. They always say evidence says.
Evidences.
Right.
Have you been listening for the past hour and a half? What are you doing? Why are you even here? What are you doing?
I think you might be an imposter at this point. Yeah.
Well, no, I thought it was an imposter right away, because why would Matt Powell want to humiliate himself in this panel? But if on the off chance that's the real Ginger Twink in our chat room, then I would love to have him contact me. He knows how to do that. I would love to have a one-on-one video discussion with him so that I can give him a couple dozen solid evidences for evolution that he can't contest because he doesn't know fucking anything.
Now, one last challenging question before I go back to the super chat, and there is one interesting one here coming about the blood groups and stuff like that. The Cambrian explosion. A lot of people say, what happened 700 million years ago that gave rise to all these mammals? And beforehand, there was like, there's nothing. Isn't this the point of? It looks like it's the moment of creation that the Bible is talking about, because obviously they don't understand the oxygen dilemma. And I'll get Dave here to comment on this first one, because I think chemistry here has a bit of a very helping hand with the abundance of oxygen emerging. And is it the blue-green algae that started to breathe oxygen out into the atmosphere? But what happened in that era that give rise to the myriads of species?
I don't know the exact correlation. I know that number one, that photosynthetic algae evolved, and then that oxygenated the atmosphere, and then you had a whole new way of going about metabolism. And then obviously I know that the Cambrian explosion occurred. I don't know exactly temporally how those correlate. but I did do a very, very lengthy debunk of Stephen Meyer that talked about the Cambrian explosion for about an hour, and showed how everything they say is ridiculous. The number one thing being that they tried to, first of all, they exploit this term explosion as if to pretend it was instantaneous, whereas even they refer to it as a period of 10 million years, which is a lie. It's like 70 or 80 million years. And furthermore, it's kind of, the more you look at it, not actually really an explosion. There is a strong continuum. First of all, it is not the emergence of all of these phyla in the Ediacaran period that precedes it. Many of these body plans emerge and then go seamlessly into that period that is referred to as the Cambrian explosion.
You also had
not
every phylum appeared in the Cambrian. 2 phylum were already extinct before the Cambrian explosion began, and another one didn't pop up until the very end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just all. It is a lot of new forms arising, mainly, I think, due to the novel phenomenon of predation. You kind of it's sort of the first time that you have predation, which is a very strong driver of evolution, right? If you have animals that are now eating each other,
accelerate things. Yeah.
So it's going to go so lightning fast, you guys, 50 million years, so crazy fast that all these things arise, but yeah,
that one, oh God, the Cambrian explosion one also annoys me because yes, it is absolutely true that we have predecessor forms in the Ediacaran and well deep into the Ediacaran, like early into the Ediacaran, for a lot of the stuff that we see in the Cambrian. But also, let's just think about this for a second from they love their common sense. So let's think about this for a second from a common sense standpoint. If the Cambrian is when we see the origination of hard chitinous body parts, before that, there aren't hard chitinous body parts. Everything is relatively soft bodied. Now, I challenge you, make a couple of Jell-O cups and throw them out into your backyard, and then take a couple of chicken wing bones and throw them out there. Which is going to be more likely to survive 2 weeks down the road? It's going to be the hard body parts, right? Organisms that have soft bodies, things like jellyfish, things like soft-bodied worms, they're not as likely to fossilize because they decompose fast. There's nothing even to preserve, which is why a lot of the life that we have in the Ediacaran, not all of it, but a lot of it, we have preserved in sort of secondary style fossils, right? Burrows and tracks and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Although that's evidence. Pardon me.
Yeah, other types of evidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the earliest forms of sponges and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we get stromatolites from 3.8 million years. Well, I don't know if that's stromatolite quite then, but very old, billion-year-old stromatolites that remains bacterial mats. But guys, this is really easy stuff. And if evolution predicts that at some point, let's just call it an arbitrary point in time, hard body parts emerge, those organisms are going to basically be preferentially put into the fossil record over the soft-bodied organisms that came before them, just by the nature of their chemical makeup. And that's really all there is to it. I think the Cambrian explosion is a massive biodiversification event. I think it's drastically exaggerated because of a sampling bias, because of a taphonomic sampling bias.
I actually kind of agree with this. So you reckon that life was as rich beforehand, but the nature of animals then did not help the fossilization process, and therefore we think it was scarce or poorer then.
I think it's not. I wouldn't say it's as rich in the Ediacaran. I really wouldn't. But I would say that we see biodiversity, kind of explode as multicellularity explodes, and as the pressures in the sea diversify, as organisms sort of take their own pathways and their own niches. But what I would say is that absolutely we're seeing a taphonomic bias prior to the Cambrian explosion that makes it look more immediate than it actually was.
Yeah. So do you think oxygen? I think oxygen was told it was almost got to the closest possible ratio that we have right now, which is I think about 21%. Do you think oxygen here played a role? Do you think these animals have thrived because of the abundance of oxygen?
I mean, I I've heard it argued before that organisms that are utilizing oxygen right they have a faster metabolism, which allows them to move faster, reproduce faster, and all that sort of thing. And when I say faster metabolism, I mean as opposed to much simpler multicellular or maybe even single cellular life that sort of makes its living synthetically or whatever. Oxygen does add another sort of variable to that mix and allows organisms to get bigger and utilize energy in different ways. I don't know though. Like that's not really my field. I can relate to the taphonomy because that's relevant to today as well. But I'm not sure how large of a role oxygen played. I would be surprised. I would be shocked if it was none.
Yeah. Yeah, so it might have contributed to some degree, but there might be other things at play here that we discover. It seems to always be that any situation is a bit nuanced. There's a lot more to contribute to any situation.
Well, I know bioturbidation was huge, right? So like just the burrowing activity of a lot of organisms prior to the Cambrian impacted greatly the types of organisms that took hold in the Cambrian and beyond. Sessile critters, like if all of their food, which is effectively like just a mat on the ocean floor, is getting tossed up because this is really what they're called, Priapolita, the penis one, because they're burrowing so much and tossing all of this stuff, mixing it into the seawater. They can't survive because they can't chase their food. They're all sessile. So yeah, I mean, everything is going in there, especially in the early stages of biodiversity. Every little thing, every little variable that you add to the mix is going to push and nudge organisms in new and exciting ways.
Do you think the transition from ectotherms to homeotherms at some point, and as you know, pound for pound, a homeotherm will probably need to eat about 10 times more. Aron just brought up the example of a crocodile once a month, and it's done. For food, it's okay, but for a homeotherm, for metabolism, they'll need to eat a lot more, and therefore, with predation starting, there's a lot more competition, and everything suddenly is accelerated. Everything has to be faster.
There's no way it's a coincidence that a lot of our sort of warm-blooded, as it were, animals show up in times of like great bounty, in the fossil record. Like they don't show up for the first time when times are hard terrestrially. They show up when things are established. Because you're right, like if you've got a power, a big body that's moving fast and eating a lot and reproducing often, you need a lot of food to supply that. And you see this a second time with the emergence of large brains in primates, and then again larger brains in apes, and again then larger apes and hominins. These are times of plenty that these things can show up because there's available resources for it.
Mm-hmm.
The person that was posting in the chat under the name of Matt Powell official, I now kind of believe that it probably is Matt Powell, because
Right.
I saw a few minutes ago he said that, do you believe you descended from broccoli?
That is a Matt Powell.
Broccoli,
Yeah, because it's
a
not
thing that
possible,
we invented
it's
like
not,
200 years ago.
Yeah, it's not possible to be that stupid if you're naturally stupid. You have to be dishonest as well, and you have to be dishonest primarily. So I think for that reason, I think that really is Matt Powell.
What a coward. Why is he here heckling? Like, if you really want to have this conversation, just email any of us. I'm sure any of us would be happy to offer.
Oh, I would have so much fun with him.
I like his choice of vegetable, though. He chooses a vegetable that a lot of people don't like very much.
Also, one of the probably the most recently cultivated vegetables. It's like there's like almost somebody alive today that's like, oh, I remember when they came out with broccoli.
Yeah.
What an idiot.
A question here, which is an interesting one. Actually, I don't know the answer. I'd love to know the answer. How does natural selection and evolution explain 15%? Not sure how accurate that number is. I'm gonna chat GPT it in a second, which is a brilliant now. That's going to replace Google. Evolution explains 15% of the world's population having Rh negative blood.
So
first of all, natural selection isn't the only mechanism for evolution. Yeah, genetic drift is actually more, I think, dominant.
Especially in situations like this, where you're looking at certain percentages of a given trait, drift is really powerful with that. And so is gene flow as far as like moving it around. So I know where this talking point comes from. It comes from two different places. One, you have like the race realists like to utilize this one, and then there's another crowd that likes the RH negative, and it's usually the ancient aliens people. Both of them like it. It's been a really long time since I've talked about RH negative blood. If memory serves, I mean, I know for a fact there's quite a bit of work on it. You can go on Google Scholar and look up the evolution of RH negative blood, and there are plenty of papers that have explained this phenomena, as it were. But like, even conceptually, as Aron said, right? Like, you're talking about a percentage of the world's population having a given trait. That is like 101 stuff, right? It's how does a percent of a population get a characteristic? Like, we've been talking about that this entire show.
So is this going to be something very similar to skin pigmentation?
Well, so the blood type stuff can be kind of weird, just because you've got an interesting relationship, especially in utero, like with the blood type of the mother versus the blood type of the kid. There are some weird relationships with that. And then with the placental barrier, I can't exactly remember what I wish I could have had. I wish I could like look this up and take a minute, because I know I've explained this before. I just don't remember the explanation, because these guys only come out of the woodwork every so often.
I'm not even understanding what is the problem. I mean, I barely even know what's being talked about. We're talking about a particular surface protein on a red blood cell that is not present, right? Is that what's the problem with that?
Like Erika, I can barely remember the argument because it comes up so rarely. And like she pointed out, it's usually not creationists that bring this up. It's usually race realists.
Yeah, or the aliens people. It's one or the other. I can't remember I honestly can't even remember what the deal was. Like,
I'm just not up to speed on what I don't even, like I barely know.
Yeah, no one really cares what they have to say, thank God.
Yeah.
But, well, some people do, which is not good, but.
Yeah, but to me, this is quite clear. I mean, there are different factors that can affect those sort of traits in a certain characteristic in the group. And I agree here with Aron that genetic drift and genetic isolation can end up actually being the biggest contributor of that. That's why I call it skin pigmentation, because we know that certain people sort of living in a different environment might end up with different characteristics based on mostly on their geographical location and the drift of that particular gene. So that could have been easily quite explained by genetic drift, I think.
I'm looking at a paper right now it's titled "Evolutionary Genetics of the Human Rh Blood Group System" by Perry et al. From 2012, and it is pinning drift as the explanation for the Rh blood group.
That's what I think too. Yeah. So yeah, and it's quite interesting here. That brings up a very interesting question, that natural selection is not the only game in town. There seems to be some tools and some mechanics and some layers to the evolution is a fact, but the mechanics and the tools, we can discuss that and argue about which one is more effective in that particular situation.
But it doesn't even have to be that. I mean, there could be a number at play at any given time. It's just that, Darwin recognized natural selection and then also sexual selection as being different. Those were the first two mechanisms identified for evolution. And then there were a number of others. And the most important of those, in my opinion, is genetic drift, because that doesn't necessarily have to have a selective pressure. That's when you have one parent organism divided into two areas. And this is the simplest. There are many different types of speciation, but this is the simplest one to explain. When you have one parent organism that's divided into two different groups, say, a river flows between them abruptly or whatever. And so over a certain number of generations, you start to notice that each individual, the west side and the east side, are visually distinct. So that if you find an interloper in the no man's land between them, you can tell which population it came from because of the traits it shares. That's not a selective pressure. It has nothing to do with their ability to survive or to reproduce. Those are just the accumulations of mutations that are going to naturally occur.
Do you think? I mean, it's one of the challenges have been made is mutations are random and blind. Yeah, natural selection might be a little bit guided, but natural selection only act upon mutations, and mutations are so random and blind, and therefore it doesn't look like there is a design whatsoever.
Yeah, but the context isn't blind. That's what I was saying earlier, right? The context isn't blind. The mutations occur, and like, you know, I use this as an example in class, but there's a species of ice fish that has antifreeze. It's an antifreeze protein in its blood. It's effectively keeps its blood from freezing. It's a de novo mutation in a protein because of a duplication in an ancestral population, right? If that mutation showed up in an equatorial population of red snapper fish, do you think it's going to be selected for? No, it's not. It could very well disappear with the first individual it showed up with, right? It's context specific, and that's what gives the illusion of design, because the environment molds the individual, or not the individual, but the population, the individual species or the population. It's the puddle analogy. A puddle looks like it's perfectly formed for its hole because the puddle was formed within the hole, right? I mean,
I'm reading some papers of late that they're actually starting to argue that mutations is not as blind as what we think. Some of them looks like they might be guided.
Yeah, so I saw that. I believe this was on some kind of, wasn't it a flower? Weren't they doing it on something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's actually some issues with that study. If memory serves, there were some problems with the way that they accounted for some of the variables that might not be as cut and dry as the researchers are making it seem, regardless of whether it is or isn't. And I'm on this. I tend to think that it is because I believe it was the researchers themselves who kind of discussed it. This is not like proof of like guided evolution, I would say, because the vast majority of mutations don't function that way. The vast majority of organisms do not have this. If it is in fact present in this one particular plant, they don't have this sort of proofreading mechanism or whatever you might call it.
Yeah. So because if mutation at the end of the day is error in copying, then you wouldn't expect them to be guided, because then
More mutagens.
Yeah.
But that's the other problem, is that creationists, I mean, apart from them not knowing what a point mutation is, they also don't realize that point mutations are not the only mechanism of genome modification. There's like a dozen, there's many mechanisms by which the genome can be modified. So they think like, oh, one base change. No, that happens. And then also all these, and then epigenetics, and then all, like there's so many things happening, and they're all happening simultaneously. Right. So that's but they need point mutation, natural selection, so that they can call it Darwinian, so that they can call it Darwinism, so that they can liken it to the utterances of a prophet. Right? They have to limit it.
Last point I want to raise, and then I'll give it to the panel for everybody to sort of give their final thoughts on the on today's conversation. Is there isn't a conversation complete without people talking about evolution having to answer questions about abiogenesis, because these two are always conflated forever. Even the Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, are always misunderstood to mean that that's the origin of life. But is there a connection? And this is probably one of Dave's strongest points, and because there's a lot of chemistry going here. We're talking about Charles Darwin he said, if I have to guess, it had to be in a bubbling, muddy area where there's like a thermal sort of a primordial soup brewing that ends up with life. Do you think this is still that hypothesis of biogenesis? Is this still the most plausible?
I think the hot spring model is currently winning. I mean, it's not, people are still looking at things in hydrothermal vents and like metabolism first. And like, I mean, we don't know exactly what happened, obviously, but I think the hot spring model has a lot going for it, because you can have things like wet dry cycling. You can have a smaller volume with which reactions can occur. And then also we're finding all these different minerals, borate minerals, different kinds of minerals upon which you can not only catalyze certain biomolecule formation, but then also polymerization. So that can even be one pot where you get, say, the nucleotides and then the RNA. So, yeah, I mean, I still am far from an expert on it. I know way more than I did a couple of years ago, of course. But, yeah, I'm still reading and learning. But Yeah, I mean, with regards to evolution and conflating abiogenesis with evolution, I've actually had to backpedal on that because I now, where I am now, realize how much chemical evolution is actually a thing, and that selection did occur on the molecular level, and where you have competing ribozymes, where you have autocatalysis happening, and you have systems of molecules that are in competition for resources, and certain sequences of RNA win over others, and that's how you eventually get peptides. And then you have these little systems of molecules evolving for millions of years until you finally get to a system that resembles what we would call life, that would have metabolic properties and be able to completely replicate and everything like that. So that's one of the mega straw men that they all push, even Tor. Why can't you make it happen in a lab, right? I'll give you all the pieces, and why can't you just go like this, like they're little Legos, and make us? Because nature also didn't do that, right? Creationists think that scientists suggest that you had some molecules in a pond and they just went like this, and boom, it was life. And that is very, very not what happened. So
my own mother got an argument with me about my 80-year-old mom was arguing, of course, that she's a creationist, and I'm trying to tell her that I can prove evolution, and she gets angry at me, and she goes to her church, and her church says that it's okay to believe in evolution. That's what she needed, the authoritarian declaration that it was okay for her to believe in evolution. So she then comes home and tells me, or she comes over here and tells me that she believes in evolution now. What is it? And my thought is, how can you believe in something when you don't know what it is? And then I asked her, because she's just saying that because somebody told her she can believe in it, so she's going to believe in it. Whatever the fuck it is, she's going to believe in it because she was told by the authoritarian that she's going to believe in it. And I said, okay, well, why don't you tell me what you think it is, and I'll jump in when I see a problem. Which, of course, I should have just admitted that or realized that it was going to be a problem instantly. She said, so she thought that evolution was where a bunch of molecules get together and make a fish, and a bunch of other molecules get together to make a man.
Wait, that sounds like James Tor.
Tor says a lizard. He likes a slithering. I think he likes slithering because it sounds like a snake, like from the bad snake from the Adam and Eve myth, right? Evil snake. Yeah, slithering. Lightning.
Yeah, absolutely no concept of taxonomy at all. I'm like, didn't you see the old posters, Rudy Zallinger's March of Progress? I know we don't use that anymore, but you've seen the poster, right? so at what point was there a group of molecules that randomly? Again, it's the dice roll. There's not any concept of processes involved in this. It's just a dice roll.
Yeah.
A bunch of molecules came together.
Well, I can forgive people for not understanding the intricacies of systems chemistry. That's very abstract. With the basic stuff you learn in 9th grade, we should all probably know that. But yeah, that's the thing, is that all of this is complicated. It takes time to understand. It takes discipline. And when you are ideologically opposed to understanding it, there's no way in hell it's ever going to happen. So
I got to throw in one other thing, because you mentioned which model is the most likely. From what little I know, because this is not anywhere near my field either, but from what I've been able to ascertain, there are a number of different chemical environments for different stages of what appears to be a sequence of unrelated processes that cumulatively result in life. But what creationists want is where you bring them a plastic baggie full of chemicals in powder form and add water in a blender to make a frog.
So you have to strike it with lightning too. You forgot about that. Lightning, and then it becomes a frog.
Oh, it's incredible. Do you still think the RNA? I mean, RNA explains a lot. It's less complex. The RNA does not need the protein, because I think it does act as also a protein for the functions of the cell. So do you think the RNA hypothesis is still a strong one as a precursor for the DNA, for the double helix?
RNA, the RNA first hypothesis works because RNA is autocatalytic. There are a number of ways in which RNA can make itself or other chemical environments can produce RNA. And then RNA has the capacity to also create DNA.
Right, right. Looks like we might have lost Dave. Hopefully, he'll come back soon for his finishing.
Well, the way he blinked out right there at the end, he just might have phased out of existence. I'm not sure.
It was too much for him.
What about you, Erika? RNA, you reckon, is still a strong?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone back and forth. From what I understand, there are still some really strong points. Like, it's not like RNA world has been booted or, as we were discussing earlier, falsified, right? I mean, I think it's more that there's more diversity in the field now as far as potential models that might have a good point to make. So, and again, like I'll be the first one to tell you, like, abiogenesis is not my forte. It's not my field. So, I tend to hear what folks are saying about it and say, yeah, I mean, you know what, they're making good points. It seems reasonable to me what they're saying now. And we'll see where we continue to go with all of that. I'm being non-committal on purpose, if you can't tell.
I have lots of respect for expertise and specialization, and this is not something that you get from the faithful. Because if you're a faithful person, you're an expert on all subjects and you can talk about anything. But the more you're actually educated, you kind of refrain from embarrassing yourself by trying to show that you know something that you don't know or you haven't read about before. And you say, look, give me a chance. I'll read about it and I'll get educated on it, and then I'll be comfortable talking about it. And that's quite respectable stance.
But theology is entirely different. Faith is often defined as professing to know things you don't know.
I think, I mean, God, like really and truly, the more you know about something, the more you realize that you don't know it all, right? And that's simultaneously humbling and exciting. I think that's why it's fun to learn, right? Like I love when I stumble across a concept and I'm like, oh wow, I don't know a single thing about this. Like, let's dive in. Let's see what's going on there.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it is, and there's nothing more thrilling, to me than talking to someone who really knows what they're talking about their given thing and just letting them go. They'll really
the era of Socrates and Plato and polymath, where you are jack of all trades, is kind of over. And people are now specialized in very, very intricate bits and pieces of the over specialization. So I think this is for the better.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice.
If you're a paleontologist, if you're a paleoclimatologist, you're a paleoprimatologist, whatever, you're an anthropologist, you have the ability to prove your point in these specific fields. But if you have a doctorate in theology, you basically are a PhD in Mother Goose. You don't know fucking anything.
Yeah, well, the Kalam cosmological arguments.
I've heard some, well, I guess I don't know if they're theologians. I've heard some really interesting, like I've actually learned quite a bit, about people who study, these ancient texts, whether or not it's like in Christianity or not. But I really like hearing them talk about the context that the text was written. Like, why might people have interpreted the world around them this way? That's super interesting. But as far as like the text itself, it's not really my speed. More power to them, but not my speed.
Right. I'm not quite sure what happened to Dave. I've tried to email him the link again just in case, but I might have had an accident or maybe an interruption in power or something we don't really know.
I'm going to cite act of God.
Yeah, he finally shot him, or a James Tour hired assassin.
But I'd like to take now your final comments on the whole conversation today. Mainly, it's Darwin Day. A man who started the whole thing. He would be in school today learning more about his own theory that he started, because it's quite complex now. And yeah, I'd like to hear from you, Erika, first, and then we'll go to Aron.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite telling that it's a Darwin Day presentation, and we spent quite a bit talking about, how this idea that is it's such a simple and beautiful concept is still bucked by so many people today, and the things that they say to try to avoid this one particular concept that is so threatening to them. And, I think if Darwin were here today, he would be simultaneously elated at the state of things and maybe a little bit distressed that we're still having this conversation. And I don't know. I mean, I'm of the opinion that I think this is an important conversation to have. There was a bill proposed in Montana just last week or earlier this week talking about how they want to limit the discussion of science to things that are facts and not theories. Imagine saying that sentence and putting that in writing. I mean, of course, there's a dissent from the folks who care around there, the professors, educated people, and concerned parents and things like that. But the fact remains that like such a beautiful and cohesive idea is still facing pushback in this year 2023. And it's important to both appreciate Darwin in the context of what an awesome idea he proposed, what an incredible impact he's had on biology, and also making sure that his idea is able to be taught and is able to be understood by as many people as possible, because it is such an awesome jumping off point for biology, and not something to be afraid of, but something to laud, I think. So, I enjoyed it. It was a fun conversation.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. Aron?
So Darwin proposed the two transitional species that he gave specific definitions for. And he said a number of the other things that should be lauded and applauded. I would love to be able to bring Darwin forward in time or go back in time to talk with the man, to just give him some idea of how his insight has borne through and been vindicated, and how it was opposed and by what people. For example, Mao Zedong and Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin rejected Darwinism outright, fully and vehemently, and their rejection of Darwinian evolution resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people. That's just not even an exaggeration. That's being completely literal. So we could explain to Darwin how the missing link was discovered 100 years after he predicted it. We could explain the corrections to a couple of things that he got wrong, like when he talked about gemmules. And we could start to explain how genetics really work, and he'd be absolutely fascinated at this. And then when we tell him why people still to this day some people reject his theory and the arguments that they use, he would be befuddled and I think greatly dismayed at the evolution of humanity, because there's no naturally selective force that's just eliminating stupid people.
On the contrary, by the looks of things.
Apparently, yes. Politically, they seem to be gaining weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm an anti-natalist, and my wife and I have been together for over 20 years, and we decided not to have children. And it seems to be that this is going to be the
Imagine
curse.
how many anti-natalists you fulfilled their wishes of. I shudder to think at how many anti-natalists went down the drain of my shower.
Oh, God.
That's an interesting concept to end the conversation with.
Yeah, that might be the finisher.
That's what I call a happy ending.
Yeah, there you
go. Well, guys, I always enjoy the conversation with you. Thanks very much for bringing so much information and knowledge and science to the community that we live in at the moment. It's an exciting time. I look forward to hearing more about your journey with biology and evolution. Any more findings? I know, Eric, I follow you quite closely, and Aron as well. I'm very interested in new species found, new arguments, new interesting arguments for how solid the fact of evolution is. And I'd like to thank you both for your contribution to science and knowledge.
Yeah, I'll extend that to thank Erika myself.
Oh, and mine back to you, Aron. Mine back to you.
Thanks very much. Well, on behalf of Dave, he's no longer with us, but I'd like to thank him very much for his contribution. He's done a lot, and I think he's going to continue to show James Stewart his place. And until the next conversation, we thank you all.